Hello, friends, comrades. There's no time to waste today. For once, the Eddie Liger Power Hour might actually end up being only an hour because I have an obligation in about an hour and 10 minutes. But before that, I'm going to give you all the best damn Marxist show on the internet. Scratch that, on the planet. Got some interesting topics to talk about today. I want to get back to my roots and talk about Venezuela and the U.S. sanctions on Venezuela. Recently, the Pod Save America guys, who are some former Obama staffers, faux progressive, pseudo leftist figures, who are basically the same as neocons, who are finally now saying that maybe we should wind down sanctions on Venezuela after arguing for more sanctions for years. So we're going to cover that. Got some other stuff we can talk about, or I can just answer y'all's questions, and we can do that kind of a show today. We'll see how things go. But first, I'm going to play the intro, and then when I get back, it's Venezuela time, baby. Without a radical redistribution of political and economic power. Love it. Welcome to the show, everybody. Like I said before the intro, we're going to be talking about Venezuela today. I can also cover some other topics or answer your questions. If you send super chat questions, I'll make sure to get to them after the segment if I don't get to them during the segment. So yeah, how's everybody doing today? Hope everyone's good. How was your weekend? My weekend was good. Had a kind of relaxing weekend. You know, all the normal stuff, working out, reading, making videos. It's good stuff. Been bad timing with the Power Hour for 2 weeks. Finally lines up. Good. I'm glad to hear it. We'll be going about an hour on the dot today. So I've been studying communist countries. Good. Glad to hear it. We're going to learn about a socialist country today in Venezuela. So I saw this on the Jimmy Dore show. Aaron Mate was filling in for Jimmy Dore, as he does all the time. And I love when Aaron Mate is on this show just because he's always got a lot of interesting stuff to share. And they were analyzing a segment from the Pod Save America guys and Ben Rhodes. So if you don't know those guys, they're former Obama staffers who started a podcast really, really popular with American liberals, with American college-age liberals, and a lot of people who maybe went to or graduated from UW-Madison, who were into Pod Save America at a time. So they're fairly influential, but oftentimes, especially when it comes to foreign policy, their political positions are indistinguishable from neocons. And indistinguishable from people they would label as the right wing or folks like John Bolton. So they recently came out against Venezuela, or sanctions in Venezuela, or not against them, but said perhaps we should start winding them down. But the reasoning that they gave is pretty interesting. I'll just play the video here, and then we'll give some commentary after that so y'all can see what I'm rambling about.
I'm Aaron Mate, sitting in for Jimmy Dore, here with Misha Pollan and Americans comedian Kurt Metzger. And we're covering the study that finds that 29% of the world economy is now under U.S.-led sanctions. 29%. And here's the author of that study. His name is Francisco Rodriguez, and he writes this in the Financial Times. 27% of all states.
And people wonder why economies are crumbling and conditions are getting worse for the working class within the imperial countries, within the imperial core. Like, we're isolating ourselves from the rest of the world with sanctions, including countries that are becoming industrial superpowers or are industrializing and now have a lot to offer in terms of trade. We're just trying to isolate them with sanctions, but as this multipolar world emerges, the U.S. and their Western allies are isolating themselves. And it's leading to worsening conditions for the working classes of these countries, which is, goes to a point that Carlos and I have been making forever, that it's no longer in the interests of anybody within the working class of the imperial core to support imperialism. Like, that used to be a problem back in the day, opportunism, or like labor leaders or the working class would think that imperialist wars or imperialist plunder would lead to better living conditions here at home because we're robbing these countries of their cheap resources and whatnot. But now, like, all of our tax money is being sent to weapons in Ukraine. The U.S. is isolating us from the rest of the world. The U.K. and other European NATO countries are blocking themselves off from trading energy with Russia. So it's getting extremely expensive for people to heat their homes. Just to go along with the U.S.'s proxy war and to line up with Western foreign policy interests and the neocons who are basically running the show in the U.S. It's unbelievable.
And 29% of the world economy are subject to sanctions. This represents a big increase in the past few decades. As recently as the 1990s, they affected less than 10% of countries and about 5% of the world economy. The evidence decisively shows that sanctions make living conditions worse in target countries. The magnitude of the harm is dramatic. One study estimated that sanctions would lead to a decline in a state's gross domestic product by as much as 26%, equivalent to that in the Great Depression. Another found that falls in female life expectancy of 1.4 years is similar to the estimated effect on global mortality of the pandemic. In many cases, the harm is similar to that suffered during armed conflicts, making economic sanctions possibly the deadliest weapon used by Western powers. And
this is why I say economic warfare isn't just economic warfare or financial warfare, right? Because that makes it sound like it's not starving people. It makes it sound less real. Right? Economic sanctions are warfare, right? People mock the idea that North Korea has been at war with the U.S. for 70 years when the U.S. has North Korea surrounded with our military, and we enforce the most stringent economic sanctions on them as we do on any country on earth except for Cuba. So how is that not an actual act of war, to surround a country with your military and prevent them from trading so you can starve people and turn them against the government? That's warfare. That's siege tactics. That is modern day siege tactics. Back in medieval times, they would surround the castle and try and starve out the countries, try and starve out the people, turn the people against their own king, get the people to surrender. That's what our economic sanctions are. It is an act of warfare that these Obama staffers and liberals who pretend to be so much better than their right-wing counterparts all support.
One place where this has occurred is Venezuela. And there was a long time when the bipartisan U.S. establishment supported these sanctions on Venezuela. They still do. But here's one person who helped support these sanctions, named Ben Rhodes. He worked for Obama, and Obama kicked all this off by declaring Venezuela to be a national security threat, which then led to the U.S. imposing sanctions on Venezuelan officials. Now Ben Rhodes, after years of this and after the U.S. failed to achieve regime change in Venezuela, now he's starting to say that maybe we shouldn't be doing that.
I mean, clearly they're feeling a lot of heat because of the border crossings, and Venezuelans have been a focal point of that. And keep in mind, it was Venezuelans that Ron DeSantis sent up to Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah, a couple weeks ago.
I have one thought on this, Tommy, which is, and this gets to trying to kind of turn down the burners on some of the pots. Our sanctions, U.S. sanctions on Venezuela, are contributing significantly to the desperation that Venezuelans feel. It's not the only reason. Like, don't at me. I get it. Maduro's mismanaged and there's human rights abuses. But the reality is, there's something hypocritical about a policy where we turn up these sanctions in our own hemisphere so high that it's driving all these people to our border, and then we close the border to those people. So my suggestion is, like, let's start unwinding those sanctions. And there were signs that they wanted to do that.
So let's start unwinding those sanctions because Ron DeSantis sent a bunch of Venezuelan immigrants to Martha's Vineyard, and it made the Democrats look bad. Not because it's starving Venezuelans, not because it's stopping them from getting medicine, not because a UN report said that it's decreased government revenue 99%. Not for any of those reasons, but because it's hurting the Democrats by causing a bunch of people to flee the country who Ron DeSantis can then send on buses to Martha's Vineyard. I'm glad that act by Ron DeSantis opened your eyes to the sanctions that you supported and helped to enforce and helped to tighten for years, Ben. These people are absurd.
And they wanted Venezuelan oil back on the market. Like, it's time to take a different approach here. This is not working with Venezuela. And I'm not saying lift all sanctions. Obviously, you're going to keep like the creeps around Maduro sanctioned, but like these broad-based sanctions that are just punishing these people, if you can relax those and then try to pursue some diplomatic effort, maybe given the fact that we have a new left-wing government in Colombia that can talk to the Venezuelans as well as other leftist leaders in the region who have no love for Venezuela, right? Boric has been very outspoken about this, but could actually have a more constructive environment for diplomacy to resolve the political crisis. That's one burner that you can turn down. And
so that's Ben Rhodes now saying that maybe we shouldn't be sanctioning Venezuela and destroying its economy and forcing people to flee.
Is this happened, I don't know, coincide when we had to go beg for oil down there?
Exactly.
After we said they were illegitimate?
Exactly. And after our coup failed. So it's failed. So, you know what, now maybe we can think about not torturing.
Really good point by Kurt. We've been unable to overthrow the Venezuelan government. Juan Guaido, fled the country recently to Miami. It's a total joke. All the U.S.'s coup efforts have failed, largely because the people still support the government in Venezuela. Or, if they don't support the government, they don't support U.S.-backed regime change. But now that the U.S. coup efforts have failed, they need access to Venezuelan oil, right? They need materials to fuel their proxy war efforts and their imperialist efforts abroad. And, they've tried to relax sanctions a little bit on Venezuela and come crawling back to them and ask them for oil now that they need it. But that could also be a reason that these Obama staffers are now saying, turn down the burner a little bit, right? Decrease some of the sanctions that are starving Venezuelan people. Not only so we can stop Ron DeSantis from sending immigrants to Martha's Vineyard, but so the U.S. can get a little bit of oil to fuel our proxy war against Russia.
The people, because our policy changed anyway. And here is his Pod Save America colleague, Tommy Vietor, saying the same thing.
In crass political terms, I would rather take the hit for appearing soft on Venezuela to like a couple of 100,000 hardliners in Florida than continuing to watch the situation at the southern border get worse and worse and worse and worse and have that become the only thing Republicans talk about in every single election.
That is such a good point. There's such an insanity to the politics of our national security and some of these issues, because the politics of Venezuela has been the Democratic Party is afraid to touch it and just embraces the hard line because they're afraid of those people in Florida. But in so doing, they're contributing to a much worse political dynamic that is being created by all the people that are being driven to our border, right? And they're coming from Cuba too now.
So they're acknowledging that U.S. sanctions are driving people out of Venezuela.
He goes in crass political terms as if they communicate in any other way.
Yes.
There's good ones for Republicans, because every time I hear about border things, it always makes me chuckle. We're screwing their countries up. That's why they come here.
Yeah.
And then I wish I said about the Jesse Waters homeless gate. He goes, these people are coming here to work.
Yeah.
My girl pointed out, they're coming here to live.
Mm-hmm.
You demented fuck. That's how they look at people. Like, what are you here to do for me?
Yeah. And these same people, so this is Pod Save America, Pod Save the World. These same people, back when Trump was first trying to overthrow Venezuela, they were fully on board with the sanctions and with the coup attempt. So this is Ben Rhodes back in 2019 saying that we should be increasing sanctions on Venezuela. The same guy right here.
Again, I want him gone. Like, we should all be very clear. Like, this would be good. I do think there's a different way to go about this, which is to be tightening the noose, to be tightening sanctions.
Tightening the noose, tightening sanctions. So he wants tighter sanctions on Venezuela. Exactly.
So there's the same guy in 2019. Tighten the noose on Venezuela. Tighten sanctions. Until it's politically inconvenient. That's all they care about. That is all they care about. They're talking about children being starved and blocked off from their medicine by this, medieval siege in modern day that the U.S. is enacting or enforcing against Cuba and Venezuela and the DPRK. But these people only care if it's convenient for the Democratic Party to alleviate some sanctions. Not all of them, of course. The U.S. still has to, decide what Venezuela is allowed to trade, at least a little bit. We are the world police, after all.
Exactly what he's now, thankfully, renouncing. But back then, when it was happening, he was cheering it on.
Well, does it help me politically, whether these people starve or not?
Yeah.
And I think we're being hurt more politically by all the refugees coming through the border we don't guard.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
But to be very intensively trying to negotiate with the different factions inside of Venezuela, frankly, talking to the Chinese and other countries about how to create some soft landing to a transitional government that can then hold an election.
Regime change. So basically, I support the sanctions because I want to have regime change in Venezuela. And this is another host of Pod Save America saying the same thing.
One of the things that's very hard in this situation is that this is one of those rare times where Trump isn't getting everything totally wrong.
Oh, God.
This is a situation where just because Donald Trump...
This is the embodiment of an American liberal right here. Former Obama staffer talking about overthrowing the Venezuelan government and sanctioning their people while he drinks a Starbucks and makes a bunch of money on a podcast.
has an ideological interest in proving something in Venezuela, and just because he has shown such deference to dictators around the world and has such authoritarian tendencies at home, doesn't mean that there aren't places where we align on trying to remove Maduro. It's just that we might have a slightly different approach.
Yeah, I mean, look,
Now, Chavez, by the way, that's when I officially remembered learning Venezuela.
So we agree with Trump about wanting to overthrow the Venezuelan government. We just don't agree with how he's doing it. Okay. And yet these people want to take the moral high ground over every Trump supporter, over everyone who voted for Trump, over Trump himself. They're evil. They're threats to democracy, but not the Democrats, not Obama, who overthrew the democratically elected government of Libya and brought slavery back to the country, or who tried to strangle Venezuela with sanctions because he wants access to their vast oil resources. That's not anti-democratic. Only Trump, because of what he said on Twitter. It's wild. The libs are wild. Libs love mass murder just as much as conservatives do. They just need a flimsy moral excuse to believe in. Yeah, with the libs, it's all weaponization of compassion. Right? When they were whipping the conservatives into a war frenzy, say with like the Iraq War, I feel like it was a little bit more based in anger, or it was based in fear too. Like, we got to go get them before they get us. With the liberals, it's a lot of weaponization of compassion. Like, don't you care about the Uyghurs? Let's overthrow the Chinese government. Don't you care about the Venezuelan people being oppressed by their government? Let's starve them so they'll overthrow it. And it's like the stupidest thing ever. That makes you wonder how anyone falls for it. But that's what it is. It's a weaponization of compassion. They have a flimsy moral excuse for everything. In addition to the excuse that's always given, we're bringing them freedom and democracy. Woo! I'm getting hot, folks. Getting real hot in here. Because these topics we're talking about are so fire. I put on my welding goggles. Hoping to hear your take on Fed now. Thank you, Samael Black. I didn't have too much to say about it because I don't think it's that much of a difference. Just gives a little bit more Fed control and centralized control, or control over currency. But it's already, largely controlled by the ruling class. Fed now would just kind of complete it. But yeah, I also did a video about it a while back where I talked about it in some kind of depth. But thank you very much for the $5 super chat. Ross, thank you very much, Ross. 10 euros. Ross pretty much gives something every single stream, so we appreciate that. And always like to tell people they can check out Ross's Substack if they want to read his philosophy musings. Thank you, Ross. The 5 heads of Marxism. I hope to one day have Carlos be the 6th head, not me. I'm just letting y'all know that I applied dialectical materialism to my nursing assignment. Nice. I love it. And I got an A. Remember, kids, Marxism gets you good grades. That's right. That's right. So in addition to doing your homework, make sure to read your Marx, Comprehend dialectical materialism, and it'll make your homework that much easier. Unless you're in the field of healthcare administration, which is for corporate ghouls only. Then you'll just use dialectical materialism to understand the healthcare system, and then you'll never want to work in it, and you'll be depressed. Just kidding. Definitely not what happened to me. Oh, Eddie, nailing the take once again with 100% accuracy. Thank you. It's easy for me because everything I say is correct. So it was a superpower I was born with. Most people's opinions are just opinions, but mine are facts. Just kidding. Woohoo. Thank you, James. $5 super sticker. Love it. Appreciate your support. You are what makes the project possible. You are what got me this microphone. Actually, I lied. My parents got me that microphone for Christmas. You are what got me this computer and this monitor and this camera. I was going to say the Stream Deck, but my parents also got me that for Christmas. So let's hear it for my parents, shall we? Oh, I didn't mean to laugh at them. Thank you, Eddie's mom and dad, for supporting socialism. Gotta love it. For using their wages that they got while being exploited to support socialism. I'm thinking about starting a co-op for myself and other electricians in my area. Good idea or bad idea? It depends on how much time and energy you have and how well you have it planned out and how much energy there is in the community for it. If you think other electricians would go for it, and if you think they'd go for it to the point where they would help you organize it and stuff, then go for it. If not, maybe just start like a coalition of politically aware electricians or a union or something. The Electrician Party of America, or try and get them in the Communist Party. Hey, Eddie, would you be interested to talk to Russian communist channels? Red Turn? Yeah, definitely. Obviously, that would be awesome. I'm willing to talk to pretty much anyone, but especially other comrades internationally. When Carlos gets angry, he instantly becomes the most powerful Midwestern Marxist. Something about his calm demeanor, shattering, and the passion flowing. It's a sight to behold. I agree, and that's why I try to get Carlos to stream more. I'm like, dude, we're going to have the most popular political stream on the internet if we get you on camera and microphone more. So I'll tell him that you said that. And I know that he plans to stream a lot more. It's just that he's a really prolific writer and, has to pursue things academically to make a living even. But I mean, at this point, we can make more, or he can make more, and I can make more from the streams than we can from a lot of academic jobs and stuff. So yeah, I know he plans to do it a lot more going forward. So thank you, the Day B. The Day B is another consistent supporter of the Midwestern Mark Show. Love the work y'all are doing. Hope the tournament went well, Eddie. It did. Thank you very much. Carlos' new book does a great job of explaining why the Western left is so ineffective, but always cozying up to the establishment. Absolutely. Yeah, check out Carlos's new book, The Purity Fetish and the Crisis of Western Marxism. We're really, really excited about it. It's an analysis of why the Western left, despite the objective conditions and the crumbling state of capitalism in the West, why we've been unable to have any successful revolutionary movements or real socialist communist movements that threaten power in such a long time. And we think it's a really important book and really worth reading. So, and it's also available for Patreon supporters. Patreon.com/MidwesternMarks. You can now get the book as an ebook. Yeah. Wait, what happened to the debate with Voosh? What do you mean what happened? I'm going to debate that boy when he's back from vacation, apparently. That's what he told me. So what else do we have here? What else do we have, folks? There's a chance that Zelensky told Rupert Murdoch and other Fox executives to fire Tucker Carlson. That's really interesting. I don't know if we should watch, because I have a video pulled up to talk about it, but it's also from Jimmy Dore. So I don't know how hard we should go on the Jimmy Dore videos right now. But that is a thing. Let Vaush have his vacations. It's hard being an establishment sellout. It is hard. It is hard. It ain't easy taking NATO money. It is, though. It is easy to take NATO money. I didn't get offered the jobs, but I had someone line me up like 2 jobs, one with the Biden administration and one where I shit you not, they said, like, this is how the guy was selling the job to me. He's like, I can set you up with this job. It's this company who helps other countries who don't have as much democracy as the U.S. and they're not as far along in having democracy and freedom as the U.S. is. So this company helps these other countries build democracy, like in the model or the shape of the U.S. Like, oh, that sounds like regime change. It sounds like what the CIA does. So those were my 2 options for jobs in the political sphere out of college, which, I mean, of course, like if you get sucked into the American political system, that's all it is. It's just a bunch of corruption and money. So doing this instead, but when I see people who have like sold out their principles and have, sold out to the establishment for money, I'm just like, thank God I didn't do that. Whoa, $20 super chat. Thank you very much, Iam, IAM, with some Arabic letters, it looks like. Really, really appreciate that. Huge donation. Thank you very much for supporting our show, supporting our content. Really appreciate that. I'll get into this video next. It's by the same guy, Armchair Historian, who we reacted to yesterday. I feel like his content provides a lot of good material for reacting to. Just because he seems to be a pretty established, like his videos are well produced. They're these like well produced historical cartoony videos that are real popular, like the infographics videos or the oversimplified series, which might be on the infographics show. I don't remember, but either way, they're well produced and they pretty much, from what I've seen, give the establishment narrative on all of these conflicts and all of these historical events. I haven't watched this one on Korea yet. We won't be able to finish it today, but I figure we can do like a nice part 1 and then react to the rest of it at a different time. But yeah, we reacted to their Ukraine video before. I had a lot to say about it. I got real fired up and feisty while watching it. So that video is on our YouTube now. And this one's about the Korean War, one of the most misunderstood and even forgotten wars in American history, but one of the most deadly U.S. interventions, one of the most unprovoked U.S. interventions, where we killed 20% of this country's population, occupied half the peninsula, all to stop the spread of communism and prevent them from having self-determination and creating the kind of government that they wanted to create.
The soldiers steady themselves against the sides of a Higgins boat as another breaker pummels the landing craft. In the back, one poor man can't keep his chow down, and in the front, someone runs prayer beads through his fingers. Another salvo from the battleships. Surely nothing could have survived the bombardment. The boat's helmsman calls out, "Time to go ashore." The landing ramp collides with a concrete seawall, fragments of a ladder falling imply into the passenger bay. The Americans scramble out of the boat, scaling the concrete as their enemy opens fire. But it is not the chatter of an MG-42 that greets these United States Marines, but the slow chug of a Soviet machine gun. This is Incheon, South Korea, and like the Normandy landings barely 6 years before, this amphibious invasion will turn the tide of a war.
Surely nothing could have survived the bombardment, the soldiers thought to themselves. The heroic soldiers thought to themselves after they carpet bombed this country that never attacked them. And as the American troops went to massacre even more Koreans, they realized the Koreans had Soviet weapons to defend themselves with. Oh, those damn Soviets. They gave the Koreans weapons as their civilians were being carpet bombed and as their infrastructure was being destroyed by the U.S. empire, a country who they never attacked or had no intentions to attack, all because they overthrew the Japanese colonizers and tried to create a socialist republic. Those evil Soviets, how dare they give them weapons to defend themselves?
Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the armchair historian. The seeds that would grow into the Korean War were sown in 1945, when the Soviet Red Army invaded the peninsula following its declaration of war on Imperial Japan, which had held Korea since 1910. Soviet forces advanced down the peninsula until they reached the 38th parallel, then halted in 1945, when the Soviet Red Army invaded the peninsula following its declaration of war on Imperial Japan.
They're calling the Korean War of Independence a Soviet invasion? I'd never even heard this before. Dude, the Soviets helped them out, and I believe China helped them out too, in overthrowing the Japanese colonizers. They were colonized, and it was like known for being an extremely brutal occupation and colonization that Japan carried out in Korea. But that's a Soviet invasion because they helped the Koreans take Korea back? Yo, liberals are wild. Duck hash browns. We don't need this. We already heard everything from Yeonmi Park. True. Thank you so much for the $50 super chat and for being a YouTube member. That's a huge contribution. But yeah, I don't know why everyone's listening to me. Just go listen to Yeonmi Park. Okay, she understands Korean history because she's from Korea. And she'll let you know that at the Korean hospitals, the people eat rats, and then the rats eat the people, and then the people eat the rats again. It's just a vicious cycle like that. So you can't get that kind of information over here at Midwestern Marks. So yeah, just go watch her. Thank you, Duck Hash Browns.
Which had held Korea since 1910. Soviet forces advanced down the peninsula until they reached the 38th parallel, then halted while the US troops landed in the south and moved to meet them, splitting the peninsula in two. The Soviets established a communist provisional government in the north, elevating Kim Il-sung, a hero of the insurgency against Japan, to the head.
The Soviets? Oh, dude, this is gross. This is a gross distortion of Korean history, of Korean culture, of a class struggle in Korea. Dude, the Americans and the Japanese had units whose whole job it was to hunt down Kim Il-sung and kill him because he was such an effective organizer, he was such an effective educator, and he was such an effective leader in battle, leading his own people in a war of independence against the Japanese colonizers. So to say that the Soviets just invaded, created a Soviet provisional government, and elevated Kim Il-sung to leadership is to totally distort history, to totally remove any kind of agency for the Korean people in their anti-colonial struggle against these people who tortured them and exploited them and robbed them of their resources and labor for years and years and years. You're just erasing that, erasing their agency, erasing their anti-colonial struggle to say that the Soviets marched in and created a communist government. So the heroic United States had to come in, kill 20% of the Korean population and save them. I haven't even seen a Korean propaganda video this bad. Usually they're not. They're at least a little bit more honest than this, at least when they're talking about the Korean struggle against the Japanese.
Of government. Consolidating power, Sung declared the formation of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Espousing democratic socialism, but practicing brutal authoritarianism. With North Korea lost to communism, the Americans decided to push back by establishing the First Republic of Korea. But this state was hardly
lost to communism. They're allowed to decide what kind of government they want. It's amazing when these liberals talk about the Cold War and they talk about the U.S. as a democracy And then they talk about these wars that we went to stop the spread of communism. Countries are allowed to set up whatever system they want. That's what democracy is. If that's what their people decide upon, that's what they should get to do. But they say like the U.S. went to war to stop communism as if it's just a given that that's okay, right? And that's something that's good, going to spread democracy, not prevent a country from forming the kind of government that their people actually want to form.
A bastion of liberty and democracy. If you're a regular viewer, you no doubt enjoy quality historical content created with love, care, and attention to detail. That's why I'm happy to announce that this video is sponsored by the course's creator via the cited and annotated $5 a month. You'll get access to all of the content the site has to offer. At the moment, there are historical content by signing up for history courses using our affiliate link in the description below. South Korea's first experience with democracy bore a disappointing resemblance to affairs in the DPRK. When elections were held in July of 1948, US-backed candidate Syngman Rhee just barely...
No, they didn't. The DPRK government was backed by the people. And the DPRK's government had democratically elected leaders. Nobody wanted to support the South Korean government, which is why the DPRK was basically able to liberate the entire peninsula. So the US came in and carpet bombed the country and installed a fascist in the South, and then occupied the South until, they could get South Korea established as an actual country. But this was a fascist puppet dictatorship / occupation government installed by the US, whereas the DPRK was a legitimate government of the Korean people established after they overthrew the Japanese colonizers and were immediately attacked and carpet bombed by the Americans.
made it over the threshold with an entirely unsuspicious 92.6% of the popular vote. Both Rhee's administration in the South and Sung's administration in the North wanted nothing more than to reunite the two halves of the peninsula under their respective governments, making conflict between North and South inevitable. Rhee declared his intent to reconquer the North to American envoys and followed up his statements with a Soviet-style purge of ideological opponents, including the Chechu uprising by communist elements, which led to between 30,000 and 60,000 casualties.
At least they're honest about the fact that the U.S. puppet government massacred all the communists in the South. They're honest about that, and they're honest that a conflict between the North and the South was inevitable. Because a lot of people will say the North invaded the South, right? Because the U.S. occupied the South and installed a fascist dictatorship, and then the Koreans tried to take their own country back from the Americans. They'll say that was an invasion. The North invaded the South, and that's when America got involved to protect the South. So at least this video admits that conflict was inevitable, but it's still a bunch of hogwash. And they're downplaying the number of communists killed. These will all be in the Black Book of Capitalism that I'm releasing soon.
Roughshod approach caused his American backers to limit their investment in what they saw more akin to a diet democracy than a truly free state.
A diet democracy? Dude, it's pretty widely acknowledged that it was a fascist dictatorship. Is that what you call diet democracy? Makes sense.
Even if Rhee had gotten his war, American support would have been hard to come by. The readiness of America's ground forces had dropped precipitously, and by 1950, of the 10 combat divisions in the United States Army, only one, the 82nd Airborne, was considered combat ready. All U.S. forces had also been evacuated in late 1949, leaving the South defended exclusively by the Republic of Korea Army, or ROK Army. Observing this weakness, Kim Il-sung began to believe that he could rapidly invade and conquer South Korea. Eventually, Sung launched his invasion, but claimed to his
Oh, never mind. They're going to call it an invasion. Yep. I gave this guy too much credit. I always do that.
dying day that it was a righteous
I always just hold out hope that they're honest actors for way too long.
response to a surprise attack from the South, which was conveniently defeated so decisively by the Korean People's Army that no evidence of the invaders was left. Meanwhile, in his memoirs, Nikita Khrushchev stated, "I must stress that the war wasn't Stalin's idea, but Kim Il-sung's. Kim was the initiator. Stalin, of course, didn't try to dissuade him."
Yeah, because Kim Il-sung was never a Soviet puppet, you idiot. You just made that up. So you're shocked that, Kim Il-sung and the Korean people were leading this resistance. Yeah, they didn't want to be colonized by the Japanese. That's why they overthrew them, and that's why Kim Il-sung is a national hero, because he led that struggle and was an extremely effective organizer and fighter in that struggle. And then the U.S. tried to colonize them right after Japan. Right? So they didn't want to be colonized by them. And Kim Il-sung also led that struggle against the U.S. that killed 20% of the Korean population. Right? They're not puppets of the Soviets. So they're shocked that Khrushchev wrote this. It was Kim Il-sung's idea, not Stalin's. Yeah, none of this was Stalin's idea, dipshit. They were just giving the Koreans guns so they could defend themselves from the vicious imperialism from the West, from the capitalists.
The Korean War was a very unique kind of proxy war, where the larger US and USSR were mostly against a conflict that their clients in Korea were all too keen to initiate. And initiate they did. In the early hours of June 25th, 1950, the Korean People's Army, or KPA, crossed the 38th parallel with an armored spearhead of 150 T-34-85s, rapidly pushing the ROK Army back towards Seoul, and capturing both Kaesong and Uijeongbu. Yet despite the dire situation, it was late evening before news reached the Secretary of Defense, who begrudgingly woke up long enough to leave orders for General Douglas MacArthur to investigate rumors of a disturbance along the 38th parallel before going back to sleep. While he slumbered, the ROK Army Chief of Staff, Chae Pyong-duk, was seemingly busy doing his best to lose the war as quickly as possible. Thanks to multiple communication failures, his counterattack with the 2nd and 7th Divisions east of Uijeongbu broke down in confusion.
They didn't have any support, dude. Nobody wanted to fight for them. Think about it. The North are fighting for their country, for their sovereignty against the American invaders. The South were just a puppet government set up by the U.S. So like in South Vietnam, as soon as the U.S. left, the South Vietnamese government was being chased out because it had no support from the people. So how is Syngam Rhee and this South Korean puppet government supposed to defend from people who are fighting for their sovereignty and for their country? Of course they're going to lose. Of course nobody's going to want to fight for the U.S. puppet dictatorship. It's not just the communication failures in certain battles. It was the fact that these guys in the North were committed to fighting for their country and fighting for their sovereignty. And these people in the South were just fighting for a puppet government, probably being paid off to do so.
The isolated 1st Division put up fierce resistance, but with limited anti-tank weaponry, they could do little against the horde of T-34s. With retreat as the only reasonable course of action, General Chae instead ordered his troops to hold fast. Soon the 1st Division was alone, fighting a doomed last stand as the static South Korean positions were systematically annihilated. President Rhee then fled Seoul, and just 2 days after the invasion began, the capital fell to the KPA.
So they liberated the country within days, very similar to South Vietnam. It took days because nobody wanted to fight for the puppet government. Duh. But they'll say this is all because of the Soviets. The Soviets had such powerful tanks and they were so heavily involved. Even after the South massacred all the communists still took the entire peninsula. But the U.S. is going to come in and spread democracy. Teach these people what democracy is really about. Not having a government by the people, for the people, but having a U.S. puppet dictatorship, I guess.
General MacArthur then ordered the commander of the 8th U.S. Army, Lieutenant General Walton Walker, to prepare all available forces in the Far East and immediately dispatch them to South Korea. This turned out to be...
What do you have in that pipe, armchair historian? What are you smoking that's making you cook up these videos? Because your analysis or your view of Korean history and U.S.-Korean relations in the Korean War is clouded by something. And it might be in this pipe.
Ordered the commander of the 8th U.S. Army, Lieutenant General Walton Walker, to prepare all available forces in the Far East and immediately dispatch them to South Korea. This turned out to be a depressingly tiny force, consisting of only the 24th Infantry Division, armed with a charmingly vintage arsenal dating back from the Second World War. Even worse, only 6 transport planes were available, which could carry a single battalion. This battalion was designated Task Force Smith and was quickly launched to secure the vital port of Pusan. At dawn on July 5th, Task Force Smith engaged the KPA for the first time at the Battle of Osan, but their equipment proved useless against KPA tanks, and they were quickly overwhelmed. However, they did hold just long enough for the bulk of the 24th Infantry Division to secure Pusan. Unfortunately, all other actions the 24th participated in afterward were abject failures, and the unit eventually sustained over 6,000 casualties, including its commander. But these sacrifices bought time for the United States to mobilize its full military might.
Oh, thank God. Oh, they bought time for us to carpet bomb the country and all their civilians, to kill one person in every family of 5 with bombs. Here come the democracy planes. Like, does he not realize how disgusting this whole war, this whole invasion was throughout the process of talking about this and explaining what happened? Like, the Koreans liberated their entire country, and then the U.S. came in and bombed 20% of the population to death and flattened every building over 2 stories tall. Oh, thank goodness the U.S. did that. These soldiers were so brave for going and fighting in this country that never attacked us, that had no plans to invade us, that just wanted to set up their own kind of government and buying time so that we could carpet bomb them. Like, what the hell? How do you tell this story and still convince yourself that the U.S. are the good guys and the Soviets are the bad guys because they gave Kim Il-sung some tanks? Kim Il-sung was the democratically supported leader of this country. The U.S. was using their weapons to install a fascist dictatorship and kill 20% of the Korean people. It's a lot worse than giving the Koreans some weapons to overthrow the people who have been colonizing them.
Within days, America had established total air and naval superiority. The Korean sky constantly filled with withering bombing raids on both the invading army and North Korean infrastructure, yet Kim Il-sung refused to back down, and on August 4th, the KPA called out an assault on the perimeter around Pusan. The KPA found the Americans well dug in, and the assault morphed into a protracted battle of...
I love how it's not even the South Koreans fighting anymore. It's just the Americans. Like, the South Korean fighting force fell apart that fast. So then America just landed ground troops and started a bombing campaign. And now it's just straight up the U.S. fighting Korea for their own country. And Armchair Historian is still trying to frame it like the U.S. is fighting for democracy or something. And the communists are evil because they're getting weapons from the Soviets.
But the perimeter came close to collapse on August 15th, when a push across the Naktong River by the KPA's elite troops managed to carve a salient known as the Naktong Bridge. Only the timely arrival of reinforcements averted disaster, all while American air and naval assets kept the North Koreans from consolidating their gains as they proceeded to devastate KPA supply lines. While the battle for Pusan raged on, General MacArthur was busy coordinating an amphibious landing at Incheon, 100 miles or 160 kilometers behind enemy lines. When told that Incheon was heavily defended and that adverse sea conditions made any landing a daunting prospect anyway, MacArthur responded thusly: "The very arguments you have made as to the impracticabilities involved will tend to ensure, for me, the element of surprise. For the North Korean commander will reason that no one would be so brash as to make such an attempt." Being so brash, MacArthur got the plan approved in late August, and to everyone's surprise, the landing at Incheon proved a massive success. This forced the KPA to pull forces away from Pusan, allowing the defenders to stage a breakout on the 25th. This was the last straw for the North Koreans, and their morale finally shattered, with hundreds of soldiers surrendering en masse as the Americans drove north, and attracted the attention of Chinese border troops at the Yalu River. With Incheon secured, UN forces began their drive to liberate Seoul. The road to Seoul.
To liberate Seoul. All right, that's enough for part 1 because I can't take this guy anymore. He's disgusting. To liberate Seoul from its own people? It's the Americans fighting the Koreans in Korea. Just because you divided the country in half and named, the bottom half South Korea doesn't mean that it's now supported by the people there, or doesn't mean you're liberating it by pushing the actual Korean people off their own land. It's Americans fighting Koreans in Korea. That's not liberation. That's colonization. You stooge of empire. You fucking moron. Dude, this guy is a joke. 2 million subscribers the Armchair Historian has for this garbage. For this garbage. That is one of the stupidest videos I've ever seen in my life. Liberate Seoul. Gosh, we need to go to Venezuela and liberate it by taking over Caracas. We need to go to Canada and liberate it by taking over all the major cities. You can't liberate a country by going to that country and fighting its people for control. That is colonization by definition. We should liberate Seoul right now. We should. Yeah, and let the DPRK back in charge. Hey, Eddie, after the stream, can you check the Discord message I sent? I cannot. I have practice 10 minutes after this stream. So I will check Discord when I check it. Sorry about that. But I barely had time to get this stream in. So, such is my life. The actions our leaders take in our names makes me absolutely sick, for sure. It ain't good. It ain't it. All right, y'all. I got to get going. I got practice in 10 minutes, like I said. Appreciate y'all for joining us for the Eddie Liger Power Hour. I'll get to the Korean War video part 2 as soon as possible. So thank you all for the support. Thank you for all the super chatters and stuff. I might be back. Carlos is in Arkansas right now for some reason. But if he is back in a place where he can stream tonight, maybe we'll do a stream. But if not, hope he stays safe on the road, traveling through Arkansas. And yeah, hope y'all stay safe as well and have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time.